Okay, it's Thursday, September 15th, and this is an end of the day SPY recap video. You can see here on Thursday, we end up with a relatively big red bar to the downside, continuation lower. And we've been discussing that for the last few days, how that's our bias. You can see on the weekly chart, we essentially reached our target on the two-up failure. When you fail to move, when you move up on a two-up kind of move early in a time frame and then come back to the halfway point of the previous bar, a lot of times you're going to come all the way back down to the bottom, and that's what we would, I've been explaining for a while, and we pretty much reached that target. We missed it by just, it was essentially, we hit the exact point, and you can see here, I'll get into this in a minute, after hours, this was the close of today, we're now below that area. So essentially we have broadened out as anticipated, given that big downward move, on this big red bar a few days ago. So now we've broadened out to the downside, and the monthly chart at this moment has turned red, which we were discussing for a while now, and that kind of has a target down here to the low of this green bar. And the reason that's the case is when you have an inside bar like this, and that's consolidation in general compared to the other bars, when you fail a breakout on one side and then get a two down going, you usually come to the low end of consolidation. At that point, you see whether you fail here and stay in consolidation, or you might break out lower, but that's a long way away. But anyway, all the bias is down, and we hit some targets, and this is an interesting day of trading in terms of the way it developed. Again, let's just go back and recap it. The intraday high and pre-market high and low here on the blue lines was the pre-market activity, and you started out with a green bar to start the session on the first bar, so you didn't break below that with a red bar. So the second bar moving to a new high was kind of a buy signal early on. But what happens here when you have this kind of a range, when you get that buy signal early, you just target the top of that area, and then you see if somehow it breaks through or not. I was very heavily biased to the downside just from previous videos of the last few days and the big picture on the weekly chart and everything else. So up here, I use this as an opportunity, and I shot a video. You can go back and look at it, where I bought puts right up in here. I have a little yellow line up here where I bought the puts, and you can see, fortunately, it immediately continued my way, and then we moved down all session, and now we're moving even lower. So obviously, it ended up a good trade, but the reason I was biased, the reason I'm biased to the downside was discussed in all the previous videos. But in terms of at this point, the high or low of the day is generally going to form early in the session. So if this was going to be the low of the day, you would have kind of held in here and moved higher. But once we failed and moved below that, once you saw the big red bar, it was pretty high probability you're going to take out the low of the day and, the intraday low. And at that point, once you're moving lower, this becomes the very high likely high of the day. And then we moved lower in kind of two waves, one push down, up, second push down, and then we kind of had a two up. So at this point, if you were really a short-term trader in the morning, you could have used that as an opportunity to take profits in here. Now, this move up looked pretty powerful at the time. I was watching it. I could show you a million charts where when you have these strong rallies in an overall down condition, it often pauses here at this yellow line, which is the close of yesterday, and that's a place to look for selling. So if you were aggressive and and were following this price action, knowing you had a down bias on the day, knowing the weekly chart still hadn't reached its target, knowing the monthly chart is still turned red, no reason to be buying in here. And if you wanted to sell, a couple of ways to do it was either actually on this 15-minute chart, watching this kind of two up, two down kind of bar here. On the 5-minute chart, once you saw it, I was watching that too at the time. I was already short, so it didn't matter. But once I started heading up and broadened above that high, I was watching the 5-minute chart looking for the most aggressive reversal. So it didn't happen here, and then you got this red shooter bar, and then right in here you could have been real aggressive shorting as well with a real tight stop, and then look for confirmation on the 15-minute chart, which then turned red. And obviously we then moved all the way to the lows of the day, and that's because the targets are down here. We didn't reach that target on the first move. So even though this was a powerful move, it was just typical broadening action that often happens against the main trend, which gives you an opportunity to short. If we were going up, you would look for broadening action, lower to look for buys. So anyway, we end up going lower. We overnight, aftermarket, we're certainly drifting lower now. We'll have to see how this all plays out overnight and what the range is, and whether or not at this point, I'm watching the weekly chart and seeing if we continue lower from here to close Friday out, it could be a big red bar. If that's the case, I would expect a little follow through of some type into next week. But then at that point, since we've broadened out on this chart, you can almost sense it. It's like the higher highs here and the lower lows going this way, like a megaphone kind of look. You have to see if this 3 bar is a 3-2 continuation or if it could be a pause area to head up. The next targets here, obviously got weekly targets down here, which are close to those monthly targets. And then if you really go back on the chart, I was looking at it, the next daily target to head lower is down in here, which is kind of this blue line. So I'm kind of watching this blue line to see if we hit this next target. You can see after hours we're kind of getting there, but that's the next target on the daily chart if we're going to stay weak. But we really got to watch tomorrow's open in terms of what the pre-market range is, just like this, get the high and low, and then like everything else, we're going to see, do we start out above that range with green bars or go below that range in some form with red bars? And that's going to kind of guide us as to if we're going to get a lot of continuation here to end the week lower, or if maybe we'll pause and who knows what could happen, and we're going to keep the midpoint of this bar in mind. If somehow we fail to the downside and come up to the midpoint of that bar, maybe it'll be a Friday where we have the reversal back up after this broadening action to the upside. So there's a lot of things to look for. But anyway, today was pretty, I would say pretty clear, to have opportunities on the sell side, given the big picture bias. If you didn't even catch this move here to buy puts or to go short, this big red bar kind of told you were going to take out that low, and at that point it was going to turn the day lower, and you had your main target down here to begin with, so you could have gotten short after this big red bar and at least played a couple of waves down on a very short-term trade. But anyway, we'll keep the bias to the downside. We'll know we've sort of broadened out on the weekly chart. We kind of know we have monthly charts that still have a lot of targets lower, and we'll just have to watch our opening price action, overnight action, the range, and how price opens as always to see what happens tomorrow. But today, again, kind of stayed in line with the bias to the downside and reaching our weekly target.